Hi, I'm Justin Ely. Let's talk about beer, shall we? I know you had sent over some questions in advance for us to do an analysis, so they're all listed here, but let's get to it. First question was, which state in the country has the most breweries? That would be Colorado, as you can clearly see from the heat map here. We did take it a step further and break it down by U.S. Census divisions. Each of the next slides are classified by region. I'm just going to run through these real quick just to give you an idea of which division in the state in the division has the most. Here we did it in a bar chart. Colorado here in the third column obviously has the most breweries at 47. If you want to know by census division, the East North Central Division had 107. By contrast, the East South Central Division only had 12. And missing values. So the data did have quite a few missing values. We decided to do what's called impute them. So let's say you had 10 ales and 2 were missing an alcohol by volume measure. We took an average of the other 8 and assigned those to the average. Did a little testing on with Google and looking up beers, and we were pretty close, so we were comfortable moving forward that number. We did the same thing for the bitterness measure. Let's talk about that for a second. So bitterness measure really just measures the bitterness chemicals or the chemicals thought to cause bitterness in a beer. It's really expensive, so smaller breweries don't do it. The larger breweries mainly use it for quality control. And also because it's measuring the chemicals, if you have more malts or more sugars, the beer may be sweeter, it may be more balanced. So it's not necessarily a true number of the bitterness. Alcohol by volume, it may not be available if you're doing a beer. So when you're making beer, you have to send your labels off to the government for approval long before you actually bottle the beer. Some of these aged beers, they don't know what the alcohol by volume is going to be until they actually bottle it. And by that point, they've already sent everything off to be approved because the bottles are already labeled. So just a little note on that. In that case, they do sometimes put it on the bottom. It's also not a legal requirement. Some states do require it though. So moving along, median alcoholic beverage or by volume, the state with the most was DC, the highest median. The national median was 5.6. And as you can see here, we included all the medians for all the different divisions. Same thing with bitterness unit. Delaware had the highest bitterness unit at 59.8. The national average was 33.9. And then you can see all the divisional averages with the states underneath them. So the state with the highest bitterness unit was Oregon. That was for the Bitter Bitch IPA, which is made in Astoria, home of the Goonies. The state with the highest alcohol by volume was Colorado. That was 12.8%, and that was for the Lee Hill Series Volume 5, which was made in Boulder, Colorado. Let's take a deeper look at alcohol by volume. So 50% of all the beers made in this country have alcohol by volume of 5% to 6.7%. So that means 25% of beers have under 5%, so we're going to call those low, and 25% have alcohol by volume above 6.7%, so we're going to call those high. To put that in a little more context, Bud Ice, Bud Light Prime, Budweiser all have alcohol by volume measures of 5 to 6.7%, generally between 5 and 6. So next we want to know, is there a relationship between the bitterness measure and the alcohol measure? The answer is yes. As one gets higher, the other one tends to get higher. However, one doesn't cause the other one to get higher. Alcohol, the amount of alcohol in a beer can't predict how bitter a beer is, and how bitter a beer is can't predict how much alcohol is in a beer. They just happen to have what's called a positive correlation, meaning as one gets bigger, the other one just happens to get bigger at the same time. Then we wanted to see if we could actually find a difference between ales and IPAs. We used what's called a KNN classifier, our next door neighbor. That just means if I have 10 beers on a table and I go pick at random a beer, I should be able to determine what it is based on the beers around it on the table. And you say, well, how many beers do I need? Do I know I need? Well, we run a bunch of tests on that. And as you can see in this chart here, in this case, we were most efficient or the most accurate at guessing between if a beer was an ale or an IPA with 3 of the neighbors or 3 of the closest beers to it in a round table, right? That means that we were 90% of the time we could guess a beer was an ale correctly, and 83% of the time we could guess an IPA. Just to back that up, we ran a separate classifier called Naive Bayes. Not going to get into that. It just came up with the same numbers. Again, just reinforced that we can tell the difference between an IPA and an ale. Just to visualize this for you, and just to again reinforce it, if you look at the visualization here, the Budweiser red are the ales and the Bud Light blues or the IPAs. There's clearly a difference, and we put them on a chart. Again, it's positive correlation. If we were just to look at the numbers on the right, we could be very confused because there's so much, mixture and overlap there. Finally, we wanted to look at possible new product opportunities. We did find that there is a beer in this country called a shandy. I believe it started in England in the late 1700s. Basically, it's beer mixed with lemonade or beer mixed with ginger beer. I know fruity flavored beers are really popular right now. I see them all over the liquor store. And then there's the seltzers. I know Budweiser makes some seltzers under Bud Light and under Nat Light, and they have a lemon flavor, but there's not a Budweiser flavor. So I thought this might be a great opportunity if you were to make a shandy specifically with an alcoholic beverage content above 5. That might be a great market to get into. There's nobody there. Likewise, only 10% of the ales measured had an alcoholic beverage volume above 6.7%. So there's a market there. And only or less than 3% of the lagers measured had an alcoholic content level that was above 6.7%. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to develop a new product there. Last but not least, did do some key takeaways here. Just recaps everything we just discussed. Colorado has the most breweries, the difference between ABV and IBUs, and why it may or may not be, why you wouldn't have a value, and why IBU may not even be important. The highest median ABVs and IBUs, so DC, Delaware, Colorado having the highest alcoholic beverage content beer, 12.8. Oregon having the most bitter beer at 138. 50% of beers will fall between 5 and 6.7% alcohol by volume. And we think ales are definitely classifiable from IPAs, and there's definitely opportunity with shandy or to make a higher alcoholic ale or lager. Thank you so much.